Number 1. At the time, I was 10 years old and lived in a small coastal town in Newfoundland that was littered with large forests. Almost every house had acres of forestry behind it, which in itself was very beautiful. As I now am 21 and live in a bustling city in Alberta, I do find myself missing this setting in my old backyard every once in a while, but it's usually accompanied by the unsettling memory of what I'm about to recount. By the time I was in grade 4, I was already trusted to be home by myself, as my mother went out to visit my grandmother and aunt, who literally lived a few minutes down the road from us. I was happy to have such a privilege. I was an only child, and my father worked in another province months at a time, so I was very lucky to have this opportunity. It usually meant late-night movies and video gaming, and on the odd night, exploring the forests. This night, I was exploring said woods. I usually never went too far in, usually up to a large rock formation I like to climb, and I looked out through the trees in all directions. The house was always in sight, so I never felt scared or frightened by being there. It felt like my own private place that I could enjoy. So, as I was scaling the rocks to sit in my usual spot, I suddenly started hearing a sound from further in, a sound that wasn't natural at all. Crying. Faint crying. It sounded like a child, maybe even an infant, crying relentlessly. I was more puzzled than scared, since crying was the last thing I would expect to hear in the forest. I must have listened for a good few minutes, convinced my ears were playing tricks on me, but it was in fact crying. In my mind, I imagined it was a young girl that somehow wandered too far into the forest and needed help. I considered going back to the house and calling my mother to help, but then I worried that the girl would wander further in, beyond earshot. I decided to try to locate the sound myself. I made my way hastily through the trees and branches, trying to figure out the exact direction the crying was in. It definitely wasn't easy as I thought, and it was a matter of trial and error to even make sure I was going in the right direction. One thing I never realized as I was doing all of this was how consistent this crying was. No pauses, no words of any kind, just non-stop sobbing and wailing that had no end. What I did notice was that the closer I got to the sound, the more metallic it sounded to me. I eventually reached a small clearing that had only a few small trees and bushes and nothing else. I had never gone this far in before, so this was the first time I had ever seen it. When I made my way in, it didn't take long for me to find the source of the sound. A great tape recorder, one of the biggest I'd ever seen, was speaking out of one of the bushes, and the crying was coming out of the speakers. This really disturbed me, as I had gone all this way expecting to find a real person, but it was only a tape recorder. As I was about to shut it off, I heard another sound coming from just outside the clearing on the opposite side. It sounded like steady steps, advancing in my direction. It only took seeing a tall, shadowy figure coming my way to send me running. Fortunately, by some miracle, I recognized my way back by identifying rocks and trees I identified as landmarks. Looking back, this probably saved my life. I never looked back, and I didn't try listening to see if that person was following me. I just kept telling myself to make it home and nothing else. I had to get home. Once I saw the large rock formation, it didn't take me long to know the rest of the way without needing to survey my surroundings. I was out of the forest in record time and immediately ran into my house, locking the door and shutting all of the lights off as I went to my bedroom. I didn't want this person to know where I lived, or I would really be done for. After shutting the curtains of my window, I peeked out through them as discreetly as I could to see if whoever had been out there had actually managed to keep up with me. I didn't see anyone, but I stayed by that window for a good hour, waiting for something to emerge out of the forest shadows. But nothing ever did. After that, I went straight to bed. I never did tell my mother about what happened that night, and I also never was able to go back into the forest again. Number 2. This happened when I was 4 or 5 years old. I was at a rather large toy store with my dad and sister, who is 2 years older than me, so that I could pick out a birthday present for a friend of mine. My dad and I were looking at the Lego they had available, while my sister was shuffling around, bored out of her mind. At some point, she wandered away. I was looking at the box of a castle set, wishing that it was my birthday coming up, when my sister returned and tugged on my dad's arm. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked, without looking away from the box he was holding. I think he also wished it was his birthday coming up. "There's a man—" "Oh, never mind, he's gone now," she replied. My dad looked at her, putting the box back on the shelf. "What man?" he asked. "There was a man who asked if I wanted to come see his puppy, and I said that I'd have to ask you first, but I don't know where he went." My dad took the box out of my hands and put it back on the shelf, then took my hand in his and put his other hand around my sister's shoulders. "Well, let's go find him," my dad exclaimed, and began leading us toward the checkouts and exit. Now, like I said, this toy store was rather large, and we were walking very fast. When we got near the checkouts, my sister pointed at the man who was just about to leave the store and said, "That's him." I could see how she recognized him from behind, as he had very long hair. It went halfway down his back. I remember him having a black winter coat on, which was strange, because it was a pretty warm day. We walked even faster until we were at the nearest checkout, and my dad said to us, "Stay here with this nice lady for a sec," referring to the cashier. He then ran up behind the man, who was now almost out the door, and threw his hand on his shoulder, so hard I could hear it. My dad spun him around to face him, then began yelling, "Where's the puppy? Where's this puppy you wanted to show my daughter?" People around started looking over the commotion, and my dad continued, "You wanted to take my daughter to see your puppy? Where is it? I want to see the puppy too." The man was stammering and stuttering and trying to get away, but my dad had a firm grasp on the guy's shoulder. Turning his head to where we were standing, my dad yelled to my sister, "Is this the guy who asked you to come see his puppy?" My sister silently nodded her head, then looked at her shoes. I think she thought she was in trouble. I didn't blame her. Our dad was yelling really loudly. "Is the puppy in your car? Where's your car? Is that it over there?" He pointed out the glass door into the parking lot. "Or is that your car? Is that where the puppy you wanted to show my 6-year-old daughter is?" I remember thinking that if he just let go of the guy, he could lead us to the puppy. Before I knew it, 3 men in yellow jackets had come. There was a word on their jackets, which I couldn't read, though I knew all of the letters: SECURITY. My dad let go of the man, and the yellow fellows held him instead. My sister was crying by this point. My dad walked back to us, once again, taking my hand in one of his own and putting the other around my sister's shoulders. He asked the cashier if she had a phone he could use, and she took us to the office. He called our mom to come pick us up, then assured my sister that she was not in trouble. In fact, she was in the least amount of trouble anyone has ever been in the history of the world, simply by coming and asking for his permission to see the puppy. I asked him if we were still going to see it, and he just looked at me and said, "Sorry, son, the puppy ran away." Our mom came in just a few minutes, and as we were leaving, there were police cars pulling up. "Are they going to help find the puppy?" my sister asked my mom, but she said, "No, they're here for something else." The other day, I remembered this incident and asked my dad about it. Apparently, when the cops searched his car, they found rope, duct tape, a knife, pliers, and a hacksaw. At the guy's apartment, they found a whole shitload of child porn. My dad and sister testified at his trial, and the guy got 20 years, which means, barring other circumstances, he's out now. Number 3. I live in Massachusetts, about an hour drive outside of Boston. Because of certain health concerns, I frequently take the train into Boston and the subway to my doctor's office rather than visiting a local doctor's office in my hometown. You run into quite a few strange occurrences on the underground, but this one is outright the scariest I've ever experienced. I had taken the train all the way into the city and waited for the subway train to come. For some reason, the serial on the green line was taking a really long time to come, and I wound up being late for my doctor's appointment and I had to reschedule. Pissed, I just got lunch and went back down to the subway. Once I was back in the underground, I was still not able to even think straight. I mistakenly got on the train to Government Center and had to get off and switch trains. I suppose this encounter was inevitable, but maybe if I hadn't made the mistake of getting on the wrong train, this whole experience never would have happened. I don't even know. So, when I got on the right train to North Station, I immediately sat down and started playing with my phone like I usually do, avoiding eye contact and any potential trouble as best as I could. When you're a young lady, taking any sort of subway train, you're gonna get looks, you're gonna get checked out, you might even get pressed up against or hovered over. As uncomfortable as that can be, it's really unavoidable with some of these guys, and you begrudgingly have to just get used to it. However, what I didn't expect was to see a far older gentleman point-blank staring at me the entire way from Government Center to North Station, a whole 2 stations apart. Even most of the creeps have more tact than that. And it was especially weird, because when I say gentleman, this guy was decked out. His hair looked immaculately straightened. It was long and pulled back in a sleek, silvery ponytail. He wore what looked like gold-rimmed glasses, was wearing a sweater vest over a blue cotton shirt, auburn dress shoes, a khaki knee-length trench coat, and carried a cane-handle umbrella. Not the typical sort of guy that would creep on you. I mean, he looked like a college professor, but he sure didn't act like one. I tried to just brush it off, although I couldn't help but shoot him a couple glances just to see if he was still looking at me. Each time I looked up, I saw that he still was, and he would raise his eyebrows expectantly, or wink at me, or just smile wider. He was really freaking me out. When we got to North Station, I couldn't get off the train fast enough. I rudely pushed past as many people as I could and sprinted up the stairs, just trying to put distance and a greater obstacle of crowd between us. As I exited the subway, I saw to my relief that a crowd of people was already being permitted to cross over to North Station by a traffic cop. I lost myself in the crowd and bustled quickly over to the station. But when I reached the front door and turned around to hold the door out to whoever was behind me, I almost choked. He was directly behind me, and it struck me that he had to have pushed through the crowd just to keep on my tail. I felt an adrenaline rush coursing through my body, and the world spun around me. I was just terrified that this was even happening. I ran ahead and pushed through the second line of doors and into the station at large. I wound my way through the crowd and went to look at the schedules to see when my train would be coming. I felt every muscle in my body tense as the guy came up to me to start a conversation. I didn't even get a hello or how are you. He just dove straight in asking, "So, where are you headed?" "Home," I answered curtly. "Where's that?" He pushed. I shouldn't have said this. I should not have said this. But I told him my hometown. "Ah," he nodded knowingly. "That's the Newburyport line." "Yup," I said, trying to convey that I knew what I was doing and I didn't need his help. I was starting to notice people around us taking notice of our conversation. I probably looked visibly uncomfortable, and I even saw a few guys nearby tense up in case they were going to have to step in for me. "The ticket counter is just over there," he said, motioning to the other side of the partition that separated the main part of the station from the back walkway. "I already have my ticket," I informed him, trying to sound polite, and yet hinting yet again that I didn't need his help. "Yes, the ticket counter is right over there," he said again. I scrunched up my brow in confusion. He wasn't even standing a foot away from me. I really doubt that he hadn't heard me, but I repeated myself anyway. "I already have my ticket." "Yes, well, the tickets at the counter are only $3, he informed me. "That's good to know." I said, knowing this was a bold-faced lie. But I got a round trip on my way here. Yes, but the tickets at the counter are only $3, he said. Getting fed up, I finally just snapped. Alright, I'm going to go get Dunkin' Donuts. It was nice talking to you. And I promptly walked away. I think the guy finally became aware that the people surrounding us had been staring at us the whole time, catching the whole conversation. He looked embarrassed as he walked off to God only knows where. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking I was finally rid of him. After getting my coffee, I went to sit on a bench near the platform entrances and did my best to look like I was minding my own business. But then, here comes the weird guy again. He walks past straight in front of me, staring at me the entire time he passes by, until I look back up at him. Then, he pretends to be looking at the schedules and disappears into the crowd. He repeats this 3 times, until he notices that he's getting weird looks not just from me, but from people all around us. Then, he settles on going and standing somewhere off in the distance, but still within line of sight of me. I cringe inwardly and shake my foot nervously, waiting for my train to be called. When my train finally does arrive in the station, I book it for the furthest car at the front of the train. After entering and finding a seat, I anxiously keep my eyes on the entrance, worrying about whether he's following me again, waiting to freak out and alert the conductor as soon as I see his face appear in the doorway. But it doesn't happen. I breathe a sigh of relief and settle into my seat to enjoy my ride home, trying to slow my escalating heartbeat and convince myself that I will never have to see the man again. But lo and behold, when the train finally pulls into the station at my hometown and I step off onto the platform, I look to my left, down the line of carriages, and he stepped off too. As soon as he sees me gaping at him, a creepy smile stretches across his face, and he starts walking quickly toward me as if we were old friends. I still needed to pay for my parking ticket, and at my station, there are 2 terminals for paying. One is right on the platform on the first floor, and the other is on the second floor. I sprint away from the man, almost slamming into a couple people, and bolt for the elevators. I press the button and thank God one of them is right there to receive me. I hurry in and turn around, seeing the man still pushing through the crowd in the distance, his eyes locked on me. I punch the button for the 5th floor, over and over, and then hit the closed door button, not wanting him to see what floor I was really going to stop on. Lucky for me, there didn't seem to be anyone else who wanted to get on the elevators for some reason. My car was on the 1st floor, but I had to shake this man first. I don't know exactly where he was, but as the elevator was reaching the 2nd floor, I hit the button for the 3rd floor. The elevator stopped there. I hopped out of the elevator and turned around to see the 2nd elevator shooting up toward the 5th floor with the guy inside. We locked eyes as he went up, and it looked like he was ready to murder someone when he saw me. I couldn't even move for a second or two. I was so terrified. I couldn't get down the stairs fast enough. I paid for my parking ticket on the 2nd floor, and then ran down to the 1st to my car. I made it to my car and drove to the exit gate, ran my ticket through the scanner, and drove away as fast as I could. To this day, telling that story to friends or family gets me very worked up and can trigger an anxiety attack. I never saw that guy ever again, and nor do I want to. I don't know what that guy wanted, what he was going to do if he caught me, or what he was going to do if I had left the main part of the station that day and walked with him to the ticket counter. I really feel for any other women he's literally stalked to the point of following them to their hometown, or worse. Number 4. I went through puberty a lot younger than most kids, starting when I was 8. So, by the time I was 11, I looked a lot older than my age. My mother had a very different approach of me growing up than most parents probably did. She had decided that I needed to dress up to attract the attention of men to date. This wasn't something that I really wanted to do. She was always trying to set me up with men, even ones that were considerably older than myself. Where she grew up, It wasn't uncommon for a young teen to date somebody who was over 18, even if the law said that it wasn't okay. By young teen, I mean 12-14-year-olds. It was after Halloween, and I had dressed up as Abby from NCIS, and my mom had my dad take pictures of me posing in a graveyard. The pictures made me rather uncomfortable because they had me in vaguely suggestive poses while wearing a low-cut dress. My mother then proceeded to post these pictures to her Facebook. Soon thereafter, she had one of her friends message her and ask for her sister's phone number. That was me, because he thought I was much older than 11. My mother told him my age, and he seemed shocked and tried to set up his 17-year-old son on a date with me because he thought we would hit it off. My mother agreed to this, seeing it as a good opportunity to match me up. The thing is, the 17-year-old knew I was 11. My mom told him this, and he didn't care. He said that I was hot either way, and it didn't really matter because he wasn't technically an adult yet, so it's not illegal, right? My mom scheduled a date with him, one where he would be coming through town. At the time, I didn't know that she gave him my phone number and some other personal information about me. I begged her to please cancel the date because I didn't feel comfortable. She said I was being unreasonable and should be excited for this. She told me that he would pick me up from the house, and then we were going to have a picnic up on this one hill. It used to be a church, but it was closed, so people use it as a make-out mountain. I was not comfortable going on a date with him, especially since neither my mom nor his dad would be there. As the date rolled around, I got a text from an unknown number, which turned out to be his phone. He told me that the plans had changed and he was going to pick me up from on my way home from school. And then we would go to the hill. I was freaking out. Like I mentioned, I didn't know that my mom had given the stranger my phone number, nor that he knew what school I went to. Though, in retrospect, I suppose it wouldn't have been that hard to find out, since I walked. I never did actually go on a date with him, luckily. I feigned sick a few days before and ended up missing a good chunk of the school week. Turns out, I didn't need to anyway, because him and his dad ended up having to take another job farther away, so he wouldn't have been able to go out with me anyway. Number 5. To give you some context, this occurred roughly 14 years ago, when I was 12 years old and living in East Side Australian rainforest. When I say rainforest, our house was on a 40-acre property surrounded by bush. The house itself was owned by a Swiss man named Hans. Occasionally, he would come down with his tractor and slash the long grass surrounding our house, so we could access slightly more of the property in the summer. It was extremely handy, because if you know anything about Australia, it's that we have tons of beasties that can very easily kill you. We lived about a 40-minute drive from the small town center. This meant that if we needed groceries, medical attention, or to contact our parents, say while we were at school, it would be a 40-minute drive before anything could be done. The house sat on the side of a large mountain, roughly 3/4 of the way up. So naturally, most of the land we called home was strewn with valleys, nooks, and hideaways. We had trails we could walk, and they led to a stream and a small waterfall. It was a truly beautiful place, but considerably scary to me and my small siblings, one brother and one sister slightly younger than me. We knew our neighbors on both sides of the property, but because the location of our house was pretty remote, our nearest neighbors were roughly a 10-minute drive away. One was a lovely old lady who used to wave to us when we got off the school bus before we made the trek to our house every day. I think our parents asked for her to keep an eye on us. The other was a middle-aged man and his family. He was a real jerk who excavated around the bottom border where our properties met and continuously interrupted the stream and waterfall's clear flowing water supply. Lots of strange and creepy shit happens when you're living in the middle of nowhere, but one in particular involved a guy I certainly don't want to meet again. Being pretty removed from people, It was extremely rare that we ever got visitors we didn't know were coming. When people we didn't recognize turned up, it was usually because they were lost and needed directions. One day though, a man in a ute came roaring down our driveway. I remember running inside to tell my dad someone weird was here. He immediately walked outside to see who this unwanted guest was. A little background about my dad. He is literally the most hardcore person you will ever meet. He has one leg after having it amputated earlier in his life after having an accident on a motorcycle while he was running from police. He was in the Navy and was brought up in a very strict household. He had grown up in a very rough part of Sydney's west, so he has some pretty shitty contacts too. In short, he is someone you really wouldn't want to fuck with. I wouldn't be surprised if he had killed someone in his life prior to having kids. Anyway, my dad goes outside to see what all the commotion is about, while my mom keeps us inside, being protective. The man has a large red furred dog in the back of his car that looks like a German Shepherd cross. It snarled at my dad, but immediately cowered when the stranger told it to shut up. Our own dog Millie, renowned beast killer just for the record, was snarling and going ballistic whilst being chained up to the house. "Hi, my name is John." The way the man spoke was like he was a salesman, a really slick and smooth guy who on the outside seemed friendly but with the overtone of wanting something. My dad immediately responded with, "So what the fuck are you doing here then, John?" The man was taken aback, obviously not used to dealing with someone as hostile as my dad. They then talked for a while, and I could hear my dad talking with a sense of confusion about whatever this man had to say. I did, however, overheard my dad say, "What the fuck are you thinking? Just call the cops." I found out later that the lovely old lady next to us had died. Apparently, John was on the other side of the property. He went to visit and found her dead. He also asked my dad if they should move the body to make it easier for police to investigate. This is obviously why my dad was telling the man to call the police immediately. Anyway, later that night, the police showed up to take a statement from my dad and John, who was hanging around at our house until the police arrived. I remember my dad pulling an officer aside and explaining that John wanted to move the body when he first arrived. The reason I now know of this is from asking my mother at the time and my father some years later. The police left without any more questions, as it looked like she had died from natural causes. John was still at our house. I found him to be a very unsettling person. The way he smiled, the dark of his eyes. He was unfamiliar, but acting like he was one of us. I remember it was a school night, and I was trying to watch TV, and he was playing songs on his guitar, with my mom and dad at the table. I was angry because he was ruining my shows, and I told Mom I wanted him to go, and that I thought it was weird. She smiled and told me she felt the same, and that I should go to bed. The next day, things seemed normal. I went to school and came home. Not seeing the familiar friendly face of the old woman stung a bit on my way past her house. It felt strange, and I hoped that she knew her family loved her before she passed. I was a bit sad on the walk home. Until halfway down the driveway, I noticed John's ute again, parked out the front of our house. I walked closer and was greeted by his dog, Rusty. We walked outside with my dad, and I heard him call Rusty to his car as he was leaving. Apparently, he was borrowing tools from my dad. He left and waved goodbye like he was someone that I was going to miss. Again, that sense of overfamiliarity made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't know this man. I didn't like this man, and I was hoping he would never come down our driveway again. My dad then pulled me aside and asked me what I thought of John. I labeled him a weirdo and told my dad I was hoping he wouldn't come back. For the second night in a row, when John returned Dad's tools, he was sitting in our house, playing guitar and annoying everyone. My mom and dad were visibly unimpressed by the situation. I heard my mom and dad argue about him hanging around, until eventually my dad told him he needed to leave as it was time for us to go to bed. He insisted it was early and tried to make an excuse to stay. I found that very odd. I was polite enough to know when someone didn't want me around, so why didn't this man? Or if he did know, why wouldn't he leave? After ushering him out, my mom and dad had a big talk in the room, and my dad told us all that he didn't like John and that he was going to ask him not to come over anymore, and if we saw John again, to immediately tell him. The next day was a Saturday, so we were going to blow up our cheap inflatable pool and go for a swim as it was getting pretty warm. Around 11 a.m., the sound of a car thundering down the driveway alerts me, and I go outside. I run back inside to tell my dad that John is back. Just like the first time I ever laid eyes on John, my dad goes outside and we stay inside with my mom, watching and listening through a screen door. John again, with his weird, overfamiliar smile and dark eyes, greets my dad and is met with, "Look, mate, I don't know who you think you are, but I don't want you coming around here anymore. You scare my kids and my wife, and I don't want you to come back. You understand?" I didn't hear John's reply. From his tone, it sounded like he was confused and tried to reason with my dad. Dad wasn't having it and told him to go, or he would call the cops. As he was leaving, Dad said, "Don't come back, or you'll be sorry." This is where things truly get weird. As my dad lays this subtle threat on the man, his face completely changes to one of rage. He glares at us in the house, sticks up his finger and spits out on the driveway, shouting profanities and churning up gravel, spraying it towards our house. My dad came back and told us we wouldn't be seeing John anymore, and if we did, we were going to call the police. I was relieved. This odd man made me feel uncomfortable in my own home, and the way he reacted when he left confirmed the feeling I got from him when I first saw him. I can't remember if it was the Sunday or the Monday after that day, but John did come back. He tried to reason with my dad and say sorry for whatever caused us to not like him. Before he even got out of the ute, my dad said, "If you don't turn around and leave, I'm going to smash your face in." He did just that. My dad then called the police to inform them of what happened. Apparently, they were going to go and talk to John. I didn't hear any more of what happened to that conversation. A few weeks went by with no sightings or happenings with John, and we all felt like things were back to normal. This was until our mailbox had been tipped out of the ground and smashed, or possibly run over. I remember asking my dad what happened, but he wasn't about to give me any ideas. He later told me that he knew it was John after the way their last conversation ended. The next weekend, after the mailbox incident, we went into town to get groceries and a fast food dinner as a bit of a treat, and when we came home down the driveway, my dad immediately stopped my mom from proceeding and said that something was wrong. Next to the carport where we parked our car, at the back of the house, there was a window that opened to the bathroom. My dad must have spotted a window was missing. As we drove down, we got increasingly more tense, until we all noticed the window was missing. I remember being confused in the back seat, not really knowing what was going on, until I saw it. A man, dark eyes, overfamiliar, coming from the window that led to the shower. My dad was exploding with rage. He told my mom to rush down the driveway so he could fuck this guy up. The man proceeded to escape the window and run down the back of our property into thick lantana, a really thorny shrub-like plant. My dad, only being on one leg, let Millie loose as she was going ballistic, tied up to the house. She raced down the lantana-engulfed hill into the darkness. She came back with nothing. My dad went out with his flashlight and couldn't find anything either. I'm not sure if anyone slept that night. None of our possessions had been stolen or even moved. We must have caught this man just as he was entering our house. The police came the next day and searched for fingerprints with no avail. My father was furious and again alerted them to John and his strange behavior. They told us they would look into it once again. That was the last time we heard from John that year. I had almost completely forgotten about him and had the summer off to enjoy myself and get ready for high school. The school I went to was pretty large considering where we were, but everyone seemed to know each other pretty well, including the teaching staff. Within my first week at the school, We were introduced to all the teachers and teacher aides. I was caught completely unaware when that overfamiliar dark-eyed man from the previous year was reintroduced as a teacher aide, except instead of John, he was introduced as Gregory something. I went into a little bit of a spin as I was trying to make sense of it all. I was 100% sure that this man named Greg something was the same man who had introduced himself to my family as John. At that moment, so many things rushed into my head. What if he killed the old lady? What if he didn't live close by? What if he wanted to move the body so he could free my dad? If he lied about something as critical as his name, what else was he lying about? What if police never even made contact with him? I was sitting there for a good 10 minutes trying to piece it together until the teacher called my name to bring me back to reality. This is when he noticed me. The look on his face when he saw mine was one I'll never forget. He immediately recognized me. He looked shocked. His eyes were wide and he said nothing, just staring. I had just found out his dirty little secret. I could sense that he was now the one feeling uncomfortable and on edge. Later that day, I rushed home to tell my dad who I had found. He was shocked and repeatedly asked if I was sure. He went to the school the next day and discovered the man had put in for indefinite leave the day before and may not return. When we learned of the news, my dad told me to watch out and let him know should John or Greg ever return. Number 6. Back in 1989-1990, I worked for a large drugstore chain. I was about 19 years old, female. As I was a college student, I worked a closing shift, which ended usually at 9 p.m. After facing the shelves and counting out the cash drawers, I got out between 9:30-10 p.m. My home at college was about 25 minutes away, so I would drive this rather desolate highway home. It's busier on the road during the day, but nearly no one on it at that hour. I was driving and saw police lights in my rearview mirror. Thinking back on it, I noticed something was wrong with the lights, but it wasn't enough to really register. I pulled over, but the little voice that keeps you safe was telling me to proceed with caution. I rolled down my window about 3 inches and waited. The cop approached me, and I was still racking my brain with what I could have done wrong, probably speeding. The cop walks up to my car, but kind of angles himself, so I had to really turn around in my seat to see him. He was mid-30s, clean-cut, and wearing a uniform. He asked me to roll my window down further, and I did, another inch. Something about him just was wrong, so wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but when he tried to open my door, I knew it was wrong. I kept asking him why he pulled me over, and he said I needed to step out of the car. I told him I would, but I needed to call backup. He said I needed to listen to him. I told him again that I would, but I wanted someone else there and that I was uncomfortable. He started pulling my door handle harder and beating on my window. I was scared for my life, especially because I didn't know if this was a real cop or an imposter. He started screaming for me to get out of the car now. He tried reaching through the window to grab me, any part of me. As he kept hitting my window, I'm screaming and crying, and I had always been such a rule follower that I didn't know what to do. Finally, I gathered all my courage and got my car. Back then, I drove an older Mustang, so that thing took off like crazy. I'm pretty sure I ran over his foot in the process. No regrets. Once I got back to the dorm, I told my boyfriend what happened. I was afraid to call the police because I was sure they were going to arrest me. He called them. They came out to the door and took a report. From what I remember, I wasn't the first young woman that had this happen. And yes, it was a fake cop. I'm so grateful I listened to the little voice that told me not to roll my window down and told me to take off. It was only years later that I realized this guy almost certainly had to follow me from when I got off work. How else would he know that car had a young female occupant? From what I understand, they never caught him. I just hope he walks with a limp and read things targeting young women on empty highways. Number 7. Every summer since I was 4, my nana took me and my sisters to California. I always loved going since she had a pool and let me drive around on her golf cart. I blame teenage angst since I was turning 15 that summer, but I threw a huge fit to my mom over going. I had just gotten a boyfriend and didn't want to go long distance for a month, and all 3 of my younger sisters were going to tag along, meaning I had to babysit. Mom put her foot down, told me to suck it up. So obviously, I was going to be a pretty pissy teen the whole time. So, beginning of June, we load up in Nana and Papa's van and head off. I live in a small coastal town in Oregon, so the trip was going to take around 2 days to get all the way down to Palm Springs. Looking back on it, I was totally miserable to be around, picking on my sisters, ignoring my grandparents, huffing and puffing the entire time, so I really don't blame them for what they did. A day had passed since we finally made it to the rental home, when my mom called, excitedly telling me that since I was older now, I'd get a chance to travel, that it's fully paid for, how grateful I should be, etc. I interrupted her, saying that I go to Cali every year. Why is she so stoked about it this time? No, kiddo, your Aunt Pat is flying you out to stay with her for the next 2 whole months. She's paying for it all. Isn't that so nice? I was so confused and just stood there listening to her ramble on about the trip I was to take in a few days. Then I started to get pissy. What the fuck do you mean 2 months? Doesn't she live in Texas? Why am I going to fucking Texas? I was livid. Well, turns out that Papa had grown tired of my teenage moods pretty fast, rightfully so, and complained about it to his sister, Aunt Pat. She told him to send me to her, that it would be a good experience for me, all expenses paid. Nana and Papa didn't see an issue with it, and neither did my mom. I, on the other hand, saw plenty. My first thoughts were of my boyfriend back home, naturally, and being bored alone in Texas wasn't looking like a fun option either. I begged and begged my mom to let me stay in Cali, but she insisted that I go as a learning experience. So, the next 2 days, I was completely sullen, up until I was dropped off at the airport. It wasn't until I was actually boarding that I realized I hadn't seen my Aunt Pat or her husband Rick since I was 7. The only form of communication I had with them was the annual Christmas card with the attached $10. To be honest, I didn't even remember what they looked like. I tried texting my mom at a last-ditch effort to get out of it, but nope, the plane ticket was paid for and I was already boarded. She argued back that I was exaggerating, that it was my papa's sister so I would be fine, and to quit complaining or she'd shut my cell phone completely off as punishment. So I strapped up and flew to Texas. I didn't get into the airport until late and was worried that they had forgotten about me. I get to the waiting area, and even though we were the only people there, save for one older Latino man, they were waiting with a sign plastered with my name on it. I gave a meek smile and wave, and they ran up excitedly, asking about my flight and whatnot. They were an older couple, older than I thought they were, matching gray hair and oddly tall. They both were dressed like tourists, with the Hawaiian dress shirts and khakis, and Rick had shades on with a safari hat, even though we were inside. I figured they were just weird old people and brushed it off. We arrived back to the house, a really nice one in a rich senior living area. And Pat showed me around the house and to the spare room which would be mine, and left me be. I instantly called my boyfriend, let him know I landed safely, and told him about the flight and how weird my relatives were. Since I was off on my sleeping schedule, I ended up sleeping in until noon the next day. I groggily rolled out of bed and walked downstairs to get breakfast. I was met with a note on the fridge explaining that they were both at the store and would be back soon. I ate, showered, got dressed, and waited. They pulled up shortly after and whisked into the house with a huge bag. And Pat grinned and handed me the sack. We got a little present, We're both just so excited you're here," she said. I opened it up to reveal a hideous star-spangled banner dress with accompanying hairpieces. It was so horrendous, but as rude of a teen as I wasn't point-blank disrespectful. I gave them both a huge smile and a thanks. Rick pulled out the dress and let it unfold in all its ugly glory. "We walk in the summer parade every year and want you to walk with us. Our roundabout is flag-themed this year. Why don't you go try it on? Make sure it fits?" Weirdly, it fit just fine, much to their delight. The parade was in 3 days, and until then, we would do some sightseeing around Texas. For those 3 days, I was completely ill-tempered. Everything they were doing was making me want to scream. I was so annoyed and irritable. They droned on about one thing, argue about another, and they had a rigorous schedule that my teenage body did not want to keep up with. Waking up very early to go on a snail's pace walk, quick to bed at night with no TV, just basic old people lifestyle. But to a teen, it was hell. All of the tourist spots they took me to were very bland, and I was not in the mood to be appreciative. Whether they were starting to get annoyed with me or not, they never showed it. I wouldn't have cared if they were anyway. I figured they'd just send me home early if I did get on their nerves enough with my moodiness. So the big day comes around, and I'm garbed up in my outfit, ready to die of humiliation. The parade was pretty long, walking about 3 miles through the neighborhood. I half-waved and fake-smiled the entire way through. Then followed the giant BBQ, which went on until late at night. Aunt Pat told me to stick close to them and to not wander off, since I'd get lost pretty quick. About an hour of being glued to them, they started to keep less of an eye on me and focused on their friends. I walked off to get some food and decided to keep walking. It was a nice night out and felt good to get some fresh air and freedom. I watched some kids play with sparklers, adults laughing loudly and spilling their beer, and started to feel a bit better. I kept strolling on, having a good time people watching, when I saw 2 little girls sprint across the street a couple blocks down from me, waving sparklers. I grinned, thinking about my own little sisters, when I noticed a weird shadow just beyond where the kids had run. My smile dropped, and I froze, peering harder to make out what it was. The shadow moved quickly, following where the girls did. I figured that it was probably just their parent, but the hair standing on the back of my neck said otherwise. I decided there wasn't any harm in following, just to make sure my subconscious was wrong, and I jogged down the street. I made it to where I saw the girls run by and looked down the road to check if I could see them. There was a little play structure at the end of the street for the neighborhood kids to play on, and I guessed they probably ran down there to play. I made it to the park and heard giggles coming from the tube slide and a small pile of burnt-out sparklers on the ground below the entrance. I glanced around quickly and didn't see anyone creepy. In fact, I didn't even see a parent nearby. If my sisters did this, my mom would be livid. It was dark out, no one around for at least 5 blocks before the party, and it was getting cold and late. I made my presence known to not scare the kids and pretended to get a phone call so they could hear my voice and know I was a girl and hopefully someone they felt they could trust. "Oh hey, yeah, I'm down at the little park waiting for you. See you soon." The giggles stopped and little faces peered out. They couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old. I waved hello to them and asked them if they were having fun. They nodded and clambered out. I know how to talk to little kids since I've been around them for so long, so they warmed up to me pretty fast. While playing with them for a little, I asked where their parents were, if they knew where they lived. They ignored me and continued to drag me around to play games. "I really like your dress. It looks like mine. My grandma got it for me." One of them did a quick spin for me to show off her bedazzled flag dress. I remember then that all the cul-de-sacs were themed and figured they had to live in one of the houses around Aunt Pat's. I asked if they walked in the parade, and they nodded and went off telling me about how fun riding the float was. We had a big flag float on our section, so they must have been up on it, and I didn't see them since I spent most of my time zoned out. As I was playing Super Sleuth, I saw a shadow move from down the street towards the park. I got the heebie-jeebies again and kept my eye on it. The girls had crawled back in the slide during this and were trying to get me to catch them. Something came over me, and I told them to keep quiet for just a little bit, that we were gonna play a joke on someone. They loved the idea, thank God, and cupped their hands to their mouth with big grins. By this time, the shadow figure was within the lamppost that illuminated the park. He looked like a normal guy, middle-aged, just slightly disheveled. As he got closer to me though, the worse I felt. I was sitting on the swing, acting like I was texting, when he came up to me. "Have you seen my girls anywhere? I lost them up at the parade." He peered around the playground quickly. I hoped they had come here to play. He trailed off and gave me a nervous laugh. His story seemed to add up, but then again, the girls only mentioned a grandma. "Oh, no, I haven't, but I could keep an eye out for them. What are the names?" This was the true test, since the girls had already told me their names during me quizzing them. "Oh, Emma and Ava. 2 little girls, blonde. Have you seen them?" Wrong. Their names weren't even close to what it just bullshitted me with. My creepometer shut up. I shook my head no, apologized, and went back to my phone. Since Aunt Pat was tech illiterate, she didn't text, which left me stuck waiting on this dude to leave so I could call her and explain what was happening. Instead, he decides to pop a squat down on the swing next to me. Great. He starts to make small talk with me, asking where I lived around here, what my name is, if I had a boyfriend. I kept my answers short, making up a fake name, saying my dad was coming soon to get me. His questions started to get more personal. If I was on my period, how old I was, if I was a virgin. I snapped at him and asked why he was bothering me when he should be looking for his kids. That's when I saw the knife. He shifted in the swing and his shirt went up, revealing a huge knife, clipped to his pocket. I tried acting like I didn't see it, and as I pulled out my phone to text my boyfriend to call 911, the guy snatched my cell. He kept asking for my passcode, wanting to see if I had nudes on my phone. I was scared to piss him off, and worried if I started yelling, it would scare the girls into making noise. I started acting like I was into him, keeping him calm, hopefully getting him away from the kids long enough for me to get help in some fashion. I laughed and said I didn't have nudes, but he insisted on getting my passcode. I claimed it was some random 4-digit number, and it locked him out of my phone. He tossed it back to me and told me my phone was busted. He then got up and asked me to come help him look for his girls, that it would be a faster search if I did. He pointed off down the street he had come up from and insisted they must have gone that way. I stood up slowly, trying to stall and figure out what to do, but he slipped an arm around my waist and herded me off. Maybe I should go the opposite way, cover more ground. I tried to peel away from him, but his grip was tight. "No, they went this way. No use splitting up." He kept coming up with excuses to keep me there, and I was terrified of what would happen if he got mad, so I stayed quiet. His hand kept trailing down to my ass and groping it, and it took every ounce of my being to not break into sobs right there. I felt so stupid. What was my plan? I left the girls alone. I'm alone with a crazy person, and no one knows where either of us are. Then I hear the sweet sound of sandals slapping on pavement and a booming voice yell out, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" Uncle Rick had come to save the day. He was running down the sidewalk towards me, as fast as a 75-year-old man can, which apparently is pretty fast. The guy suddenly let go of me and whipped out his knife, aiming at Rick. I ran away and started yelling to my uncle that he had a knife. Apparently, my aunt and uncle both have concealed weapons permits. And why wouldn't they? It's Texas. He whipped out his handgun and starts yelling at me to get back. The man's eyes grow wide, and he throws his knife in Rick's direction, turns to run and hops a fence, and keeps on running through someone's yard. Rick lowers his gun and ushers me to him, and I start choking out what happened between sobs. He kept his cool the entire time and wrapped me in a big bear hug. We went back to the park and I crawled inside the tube to find the little girls curled up at the bottom together, asleep. Rick called Aunt Pat and I woke the kids up, congratulating them on staying quiet so well. We all clambered out when Aunt Pat shows up in the car. I got a good lecture from her, and so did the girls. Apparently, Aunt Pat knew them and their grandma. She loaded us up and took us back to the BBQ, which was now shut down and replaced with a search party and police. The girls ran back to Grandma, and I had to explain what happened to the police and give a description of the guy. Turns out, they've had multiple calls on him for hovering around the playground and following kids home from the bus stop. They were surprised when I said Rick hadn't shot the guy, just scared him. The cop turned to my uncle and asked why he didn't, and Rick gestured to me and said, "She's from Oregon. Didn't want to make her liberal ass shit itself." The next day, Aunt Pat woke me up early and drove me to a gym, where she then paid for a trainer to give me self-defense lessons for the rest of the time I was in Texas. After the incident, I was much less of a dickhead teen and did a 180 on my mood. Aunt Pat didn't even call to tell my mom, saying there was no point in worrying her if we'd handled it. I don't know if they ever caught the creep, but I definitely have the skill set now to handle him if I ever run into him or someone alike again. I just hope I never do. I'll leave being a badass to Uncle Rick and Aunt Pat.